Carl Jung recorded a psychological phenomenon so rare that most people never experience it in their entire lives. He called it the click, that single moment when everything you've been unconsciously struggling with suddenly becomes crystal clear. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly across hundreds of patients. What disturbed him most was how close many came to this insight without fully reaching it. People would spend years circling the truth, sensing that something was off, feeling mounting pressure, until one day, in a brief instant, their entire psychological framework shifted. But Jung also warned about this moment. You cannot prepare for it, you cannot force it, and once it happens, you cannot ignore it. Today, we'll explore the signs Jung identified that appear just before the click, and why this moment either transforms you completely or shatters the illusions you've been living under. The feeling begins subtly. You wake up one day sensing that something is wrong, but you cannot pinpoint what it is. You continue your routines, same job, same relationships, same habits, but everything now feels empty, like watching yourself perform in a play you never auditioned for. Jung called this the pre-integration state, where your unconscious mind has already recognized a truth that your conscious mind refuses to accept. Restlessness sets in without reason. Conversations that once felt meaningful now seem hollow. Activities that used to bring joy feel mechanical. You find yourself lost in thought, staring at walls, sensing that something fundamental is wrong with your life. Jung observed this pattern emerging in patients months before their psychological breakthroughs. They often described feeling like actors in their own lives, performing actions that no longer held meaning. Consider some illustrative examples based on Jung's observations. One person described feeling like they were wearing a costume that had become too tight and suffocating, unable to remove it. Another described living behind glass, watching life unfold without truly participating. These experiences were not clinical depression or anxiety. They reflected a profound, unconscious awareness that something in life had gone off course. These were signs of consciousness attempting to break through the persona, the social mask that Jung described as the barrier between who you pretend to be and who you truly are. The unconscious communicates through discomfort, sending signals that something needs to shift. However, these signals rarely appear as clear thoughts or logical reasoning. Instead, they manifest as vague feelings of unease, sudden emotional reactions that feel excessive, or dreams that unsettle you without revealing their meaning. Jung dedicated decades to studying how the unconscious seeks the conscious mind's attention. He found that most people ignore these cues for years, sometimes decades, because confronting them would require dismantling the life they have carefully constructed. Yet the unconscious persists, discomfort grows sharper, and patterns previously invisible become noticeable. You may recognize recurring choices in relationships, repeated self-sabotage in projects, or habitual defensive reactions to criticism. Jung termed this recognition of patterns the beginning of shadow awareness, an understanding of the parts of yourself you've denied and projected onto others. You start to realize that the traits that irritate you most in others often mirror qualities you refuse to accept in yourself. This realization intensifies resistance. Your ego, responsible for maintaining your self-image, fights back by offering justifications, rationalizations, and excuses. It convinces you that others or circumstances are the problem, or that you are simply unlucky or misunderstood. The ego's role is to preserve psychological stability, and nothing threatens it more than the possibility that your personality might be a carefully constructed mask designed to gain approval rather than express authenticity. Jung observed that the stronger the persona, the more intense the resistance to seeing through it. People in this pre-awareness state often experience what he called psychic inflation or deflation. They may inflate their ego to extraordinary levels, believing themselves special, misunderstood geniuses unrecognized by the world, or they may collapse entirely, seeing themselves as worthless. Broken or fundamentally flawed, both responses act as defense mechanisms, preventing the true realization that you are neither special nor broken, but simply unconscious. Much of your life has been guided by programs installed by parents, culture, trauma, and unspoken agreements about who you should be. Then something shifts, often triggered by a crisis. A relationship may end, a career might collapse, someone may pass away, or a health scare forces you to face your mortality. Jung observed that these moments rarely occur during comfortable times. They demand pressure, stress, and the dismantling of old structures. When your external world falls apart, the internal structures you've relied on can no longer hide behind it. You are compelled to confront the psychological patterns you have long avoided. Yet even in crisis, transformation doesn't happen automatically. Jung noted cases where people endured severe loss, but rebuilt the same unconscious patterns, finding new circumstances to replay old dramas. The key difference between those who transformed and those who didn't was a single factor: the willingness to remain in discomfort without rushing to fix, escape, or rationalize it. Those who experienced this shift could tolerate uncertainty, sitting with the anxiety of a world falling apart. Empaths are not broken. They are alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path provides exercises, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to convert overwhelm into clarity, offered by Surreal Mind. The 236-page downloadable ebook is ready to access at surrealmind.com. In moments of stillness, surrounded by the ruins of what once worked, something changes. The inner voice, the constant narrator shaping your sense of self, begins to feel less authoritative. You recognize it as just a voice, not ultimate truth. You start observing your thoughts rather than fully identifying with them. You experience emotions without letting them define you. Jung described this as the start of conscious awareness, where you step back from total identification with your psychological content and begin to see it as content rather than reality. This is unsettling because it reveals that everything you assumed was stable is actually flexible. Your personality isn't permanent. Your beliefs aren't absolute truths. Your identity isn't your authentic self, but rather a narrative you've been telling yourself and others. The firm ground you thought you stood on fades away, leaving you drifting in a psychological space without coordinates. Many people panic here, clinging to anything that offers stability, even if it means rebuilding the very prison they just escaped. Yet, if you can remain present in this state of uncertainty and resist the urge to immediately form a new identity to replace the collapsing one, something remarkable occurs. It's the moment Jung described as both frightening and freeing. You perceive the whole pattern clearly. You realize you've been playing a role, everyone else is playing roles, And much of human suffering arises from fully identifying with these roles rather than seeing them as temporary positions adopted for social functioning. This insight isn't intellectual. You can't think your way to it. It's a full-body experience, a sense of pieces clicking together, a sudden recognition of a pattern that was always there but invisible until that exact moment. Jung compared it to optical illusions, where scattered dots suddenly align into a clear image. Once you experience it, there's no going back. The previous way you understood yourself and the world becomes impossible to return to. What you perceive in that moment differs from person to person, yet Jung found recurring themes in his observations. You notice how you've been living to meet others' expectations, performing a version of yourself designed to gain love, approval, success, or safety. You acknowledge the parts of yourself you pushed into the shadow, the qualities you deemed unacceptable, and see how trying to suppress them only gave them power over you unconsciously. You realize the people drawn into your life, especially those who caused harm, reflected aspects of yourself you needed to integrate. You understand that the reality you've been living in is just one interpretation, not objective truth. The meanings you assign to events, the stories explaining why things happened, the beliefs about how the world works, all were constructed, not discovered. This doesn't mean that nothing is real or true. It means that your previous perspective was shaped by layers of unconscious conditioning, which you mistakenly took for clarity. The click happens when those filters become visible, allowing you to decide which ones to keep and which to let go. Joseph warned that this moment of insight can feel overwhelming. Some people experience it as a temporary ego death, where the sense of being a separate, solid self dissolves completely. Others experience it as awakening, feeling more alive and present than ever before. The intensity of this experience often reflects how tightly you clung to your former identity. The stronger the attachment, the more dramatic the release. Joseph described this transition as intensely disorienting, like standing on the edge of an abyss where all familiar landmarks have disappeared, leaving you suspended between two states of being. What follows the click determines whether it leads to lasting transformation or just a fleeting insight. Many, Joseph observed, immediately try to fit this realization back into their old framework. They adopt a new role, becoming the enlightened one, the awakened person, the truth teller. They see through the old game, but then begin playing a new version of it. Joseph called this inflation, where one identifies with the archetype of the wise person instead of integrating the insight into a balanced personality. True integration occurs when you can maintain this awareness without turning it into a new identity. You recognize that you are playing roles while understanding their nature. You engage in social agreements while seeing them for what they are, not as ultimate reality. You feel emotions without confusing yourself for them. You think thoughts without assuming they are absolute truth. Joseph referred to this as the individuated person, someone who has merged conscious and unconscious elements into a functional whole. But this integration is not a single event. The click is just the beginning. What follows is the challenging task of living with this awareness in a world where most remain unconscious of these dynamics. You cannot fully explain it to others because understanding is experiential, not intellectual. You cannot return to shallow conversations about surface topics because you now perceive the deeper patterns underneath. You cannot join in unconscious games because you recognize them for what they are. This awareness brings a unique kind of loneliness. You are surrounded by people who seem to sleepwalk through life, repeating unseen patterns, defending unquestioned positions, chasing goals they never chose. You may want to wake them up, but Joseph discovered that no one can force another person's click. It must arise from within. The most you can do is live as an example of conscious awareness and be present when others begin to awaken. The world after the click follows a different set of rules. You stop expecting others to complete you because you realize that true wholeness comes from integrating your own shadow, not from finding the perfect partner. You stop chasing achievements as proof of your worth, understanding that worth isn't earned. It is recognized within yourself. You no longer avoid discomfort because you've learned that growth emerges in the space between what is and what is becoming. Jung observed that those who experience the click and integrate it properly become more effective in life, not less. They don't escape into spiritual bypassing or avoid responsibility. Instead, they engage more fully, without clinging to outcomes as a way to validate their internal worth. They can pursue goals without tying their identity to the results. They can love others without expecting them to meet unconscious parental needs. They can participate in culture without being completely defined by it. The click shows that you have been living in a self-imposed prison, and the door was never locked. Every limitation you believed was real is actually a belief you inherited and never questioned. Every seemingly impossible barrier is a boundary you created for safety. Every fixed aspect of your personality is a defense mechanism you can release. Jung's most radical insight is that humans are far more fluid, adaptable, and capable of change than we usually assume. But this freedom carries responsibility. Once you recognize that you have been unconsciously shaping your reality through your beliefs, perceptions, and reactions, external circumstances can no longer be blamed. You become the author of your experience, and with that comes the responsibility to edit the story when it isn't working. This responsibility is why many resist the click, even when they are close to it. It is easier to see yourself as a victim of circumstances than to admit that you have been unconsciously shaping those circumstances yourself. The people around you will notice the change, even if they cannot fully explain it. Some will be drawn to your increased presence and authenticity. Others may feel threatened by you because your consciousness mirrors their unconscious patterns. Jung noted that people who achieve individuation often experience a loss of friends or relationships during this phase, not due to cruelty or superiority, but because they stop playing the unconscious roles that sustained those connections. For instance, a friendship built on mutual complaining fades when you stop complaining. A relationship based on rescuing and being rescued ends when you no longer need or offer rescue. This natural pruning of relationships isn't a failure, it's alignment. You are creating space for connections rooted in conscious choice rather than unconscious need. The loneliness that arises can feel permanent, but it is temporary. Jung observed that individuated individuals eventually find each other, recognizing the same awareness and presence they have cultivated in themselves. These new connections function on a different level than unconscious relationships. They allow for more honesty, more clarity, and less projection. Jung found this discovery, the click, particularly remarkable because it is irreversible. Once you perceive reality this way, you cannot unsee it. Socially, you can adapt or participate, but you can no longer fully buy into the old roles as before. This awareness is permanent. It carries both a curse and a gift. The curse is that you cannot return to the comfort of unconsciousness. The gift is that you are no longer governed by unknown forces. The click does not simplify life. It often adds complexity because you now perceive layers and dynamics that were previously invisible. Yet it also makes life more authentic. You are genuinely living your life, rather than acting out a script written by someone else. You're making choices based on authentic preferences, rather than unconscious conditioning. You're forming relationships grounded in genuine connection rather than compensatory neurosis. You're seeking meaning instead of merely avoiding discomfort. Joseph dedicated his career to studying this transformation because he experienced it firsthand during what he described as his confrontation with the unconscious. After separating from Freud, he spent years in psychological turmoil. Overwhelmed by unconscious material he couldn't control or comprehend. The turning point came when he stopped trying to dominate it and instead began to engage with it consciously, learning to integrate it into his awareness. Everything Joseph taught about individuation came from this personal journey of letting go of his old identity and entering a more conscious relationship with himself. His goal was to allow others to undergo this process without enduring the prolonged suffering he faced. This is why he recorded the signs, stages, and patterns, not to provide a formula, since the breakthrough cannot be forced, but to help people recognize when they are in the pre-breakthrough stage and encourage them to stay present rather than retreat to the comfort of unconsciousness. The discomfort you feel is not a signal that something is wrong. It indicates that something within is seeking alignment. Consider a narrative example illustrating this transformation. We can see it in the story of someone who spent decades building an outwardly perfect life, a successful career, a stable marriage, and respect in their community. Internally, however, they felt like a fraud, performing a persona designed to satisfy others. The turning point came in a moment of stillness after a minor setback, not a major crisis, just a small failure that fractured their facade. Within that crack, they saw the full structure of self-deception they had maintained, not lies meant to harm, but the common illusions we create about who we must be to earn love and acceptance. This realization was quiet, gentle even, but irreversible. From that moment onward, they could no longer sustain the performance as if it were real. Joseph observed this pattern repeatedly. The breakthrough often occurs not during our loudest, most dramatic moments, but in our quietest ones. When the noise fades and we are left alone with the truths we've been avoiding, that is when consciousness emerges. The individual in this example didn't immediately quit their job or leave their marriage. Instead, they gradually began the work of becoming authentic within those structures, or chose to leave them when authenticity became impossible. You're reading this because you're near that realization. Perhaps you've sensed it for months or even years. Maybe you've had brief glimpses but couldn't maintain awareness. Or maybe you're in the middle of a crisis that's dismantling old frameworks. Whatever brought you here, know that the click is approaching. You can't force it, but you can stop resisting it. You can sit with the discomfort instead of distracting yourself. You can question your assumptions instead of defending them. You can notice your patterns instead of unconsciously repeating them. The moment before the click can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff with nothing visible below. Your ego urges you to retreat to safety, Every instinct tells you that jumping is deadly, and in a way, it is the version of you that has been running the show will die. But what emerges is more authentic, more alive, and more capable of real experience than the constructed self ever was. Joseph described this as psychological death and rebirth, the most crucial transition a person can experience. You'll only encounter this exact awareness once. Tomorrow, you'll either have clicked and entered a new reality, or retreated into unconsciousness, leaving this moment as a distant memory. The choice isn't truly a choice. Once consciousness is glimpsed, it gains momentum. You can delay it, but you cannot stop it. The unconscious will escalate until you pay attention. The question is whether you meet it consciously or let it break you until there's no alternative. This is both a warning and an invitation. The click is near. Stay awake, stay present, stop running. Let the old structures collapse. Trust that what arises from the chaos will be more genuine than what you're leaving behind. Joseph spent decades showing that this transformation is possible, that consciousness can evolve, and that humans are not fixed but fluid, capable of profound change. You are standing where hundreds of his patients stood before they clicked. The next moment can change everything. If this resonates, if you recognize these patterns, if you're tired of playing a role that no longer fits, comment below, "It finally clicked." And if you want to explore what comes after this moment, subscribe now. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll transform overwhelm into clarity with practical exercises. Joseph inspired boundaries and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11, downloadable ebook in stock now. Begin your journey today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly.